watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. Joining me today is Hayley Andrews of Your Freedom Empire. Hello Hayley.
Hello.
Good journey down?
It was okay.
So-so.
So-so.
We won't go into detail.
No, it's best we don't.
Okay, just glad you're here anyway. Good to
Thank
see
you.
you. Okay, and Nicholas Zorpides, who is founder of Nicholas Chartered Surveyors. Welcome to you. Good to have you back again. I think your second time now, so should be a bit easier for you this time.
We'll see.
Okay, Nicholas, you're going to go first. So, I'm hoping to buy a new house on a small housing estate in the home counties. Although there is a river running close to the town, it's not very close to the development. However, I am worried after seeing the devastation flooding can cause, even in what have appeared to be safe areas. Will any danger of flooding show up in any reports created by my solicitor? I presume he's thinking there's a report on title there or something, but during the purchase process, or should I make my own inquiries? And if so, who with?
Okay. So your solicitor will carry out searches for the property to see if it is in a flood zone risk. And that comes up as high, medium, low or very low. And if it is high, your lender might require you to get insurance against it. So you could do that to safeguard your own risk. You can carry out independent surveys, albeit there isn't a flood certificate for these kind of surveys, but you can instruct a chartered surveyor.
Is that a clever way of saying there's nothing you can rely on?
No, it's more saying that unlike, say, valuation, you have an accredited valuer who is certified for that particular role. With flood surveys, it's not quite the same.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is you can look to the RSES to appoint a experienced chartered surveyor who has experience in these matters.
Yeah, I suppose perhaps the saving grace is that the developer themselves will have had to go through that process when they, for the planning consent. I seem to
Planning
remember
consent, lending requirements.
Yeah.
So they would have, done their own due diligence. But again, you can look to get your own independent survey. It is something that is getting worse, mainly due to climate change, global warming, infrastructure as well. So
I seem to remember some years ago I did a development on the Thames, and you applied to the Environment Agency, and they gave you, I think it was sort of 1 in 100 year chances.
So that's what the searches are when your solicitor carries out them searches. That would also include contamination as well under that and other matters.
And the dreaded Japanese knotweed, of course.
And that as
Again,
well.
a really big issue.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the.
Have you ever come across that in any of your developments?
No, I haven't. Although one of the areas I invest in, where I'm buying residential property and letting them out as buy-to-lets or HMOs, it has got quite a lot of Japanese knotweed because it's around the rail. So they used to. It was a Victorian plant, wasn't it?
Yes.
So they brought it over from. Was it Japan? I think it was.
Yeah.
I think they brought it over from Japan to kind of knit the banks of the
But it was fast growing,
together.
and you're right, it did knit the banks
knit
together.
everything together, kept it nice and neat. Looks lovely, but it's very, very destructive, and it's becoming a really big issue.
I think
really
getting
big
rid
issue.
of it is the issue. I mean, you have to excavate it, and then it has to go to a special decontamination area.
It's ongoing as well. So the treatment plan has to be ongoing. I think the good thing about it is because it's becoming more and more common, and obviously, lenders are now. It used to be where you couldn't get a mortgage if it had Japanese knotweed. Now, if there's kind of a plan in place, a treatment plan in place, that you've got more lenders that will look at that now. now,
Yes.
and see it as manageable and not as risky. But it is a big issue along with flooding. Yeah.
Quite on when you mentioned about it, well, it's getting worse. It's quite interesting. I remember having a conversation with the Environment Agency, and of course, you tend to ask, well, why don't these floodplains still work? And of course, the old system was that rain would just come off your gutters, it would fall into the fields would actually absorb a certain amount. So by the time it actually got to the rivers, it was quite well reduced.
Yeah.
But now, with the excellent draining systems that we've got, they're so fast that within a minute from falling from your roof, it's actually in the river.
Yeah.
And of course, that's caused the sudden upsurge of flooding.
I think a lot of people have obviously built out, and so you've got less grassland and things like that to kind of absorb.
Yeah.
So most people will do their driveways and things like that. So I think it's just getting worse and worse and worse, isn't it?
Well, I know, and I mean, I actually used to live on virtually on the Thames, and we had an area that we wanted to sort of box in downstairs, and what they made us do was dig a great big sort of incursion into the land so we had to compensate flood area for built area.
Yeah, but many people don't ask permission. They'll just go away and block pave their drive and don't realise that perhaps they do have to ask for that permission, and they just get on with it. And of course,
what a complex world we live in.
Yeah.
Okay, Hayley, your question.
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you for that. Anyway. Hayley, taking a 6-bedroom home and converting it into an HMO, would the panel think it would add to the property's value overall, or would it decrease its potential sales value? In addition, would its sales potential be diminished if one attempted to sell it as a going concern, or would it be better to revert it back to a single dwelling if I decided to opt out of the project at a later date?
Ooh, great question. There's a few different questions in there as well. Let me try and think about that in order.
You want something else?
No, yeah. Well, actually, Nicholas should probably answer that question as he.
I just want to see if he agrees with you.
Yeah, well, that's fine. I'm sure he will. So there's a few different ways that, I mean, in terms of the last part of that question, let's handle that first. Would the property be worth more as, a house sold as a family home or a HMO sold as an ongoing concern? Would really come down to the asset quality, the area, the demand for HMOs, etc., etc. So there's no, there's no one answer for that. It depends, and without having the postcode of the person that sent the, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. But there are a few different ways that you can value a HMO. So of course, your smaller HMOs, so your 3 to kind of 6, you are more likely to get a bricks and mortar comparable. So I always work out my smaller HMOs from a valuation point of view based off, sold comparables within that area, like for like, similar size, etc. That being said, if you are 3 to 4 will always be bricks and mortar, in my opinion. From my experience over the last 20 years and 15 doing HMOs, that's been very much the model.
Is that because of the lesser licensing requirements?
Well, it's because they don't require a mandatory license, even if they do require additional or selective. And of course, if you're outside of an Article 4 area under permitted development, you can switch from C3 to C4. So I suppose you can turn it back into a house. So if it looks like a house, it feels like a house, it's going to be valued as a house. But when you're looking at, and very much now the model, and definitely the last 5 years, when you're looking at your 5 and your 6 person HMOs and you're doing en suites in every single room, you're making modifications and changes to the property, converting it into a HMO, you are more likely then to get a commercial valuation, and that will be based off a local yield, a local commercial yield. But I'm going to caveat that you're not guaranteed it. It's a very grey area. It depends on your broker, it depends on your valuer, it depends on the lender. So I would say always work your figures out on bricks and mortar. You may get a hybrid between the two, so a comparable and the fact that it is an income producing asset, or you may get a commercial valuation based off the local yield. As soon as you go to 7 or more, it's a commercial valuation basically. So you will get your commercial valuation there. So the grey area, of course, is the 5 and 6 beds, I would say. And it's very much always depends. So I always minimise my risk as much as possible by doing my figures based off the bricks and mortar comparable. If I end up getting a commercial based off the income it produces and I get, you know, a much higher value as a result, that's a bonus.
So simply we're back to comparables, aren't we then?
Yeah, always.
Yeah, that's a very
always.
good rounded answer, to be fair. Yes, it would be based on the comparable method up until it gets to a large enough scale whereby you can't convert it back, and then you get the commercial.
Do you agree with Hayley on the numbers on that?
Upwards of 8,
Upwards of
I would say. 7, yes, can be. Again, depends on
Well,
where
7
and-
is sui generis, so
Yeah.
you are in a different use classification. You are no longer, you know, in your residential kind of
Yeah,
realm.
very
So
much so.
every single 7-bed I've
Yeah.
ever had has been
Quite a
probably
lot of
valued on a
HMO
commercial basis.
Quite a lot of HMO projects that I've seen have actually been houses that were probably these days oversized for the area. Perhaps the, you know, the big Victorian houses that are now, well, that would certainly be out of place as a 8 or 9 bedroom
House,
Victorian
yeah.
house. So therefore, you've probably got no downside to saying, well, it's going to be HMO and that's the way it's going to stay.
Well, it comes down to demand as well, doesn't it? You know, and the valuer will very much look at that as well as, you know, and you should be looking at that as well. Because ultimately we can turn any property into whatever we want, but if there's no demand for that type of accommodation, it's not worth the paper it's written on, basically. So it comes down to good, solid comparables, good, you know, good demand for that type of accommodation in the area. Are you making physical changes to the property to convert it into a HMO? And how easy can it be converted back to a home? And then whether it will be worth more or less will come down to the area itself. Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, there we are. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break with Nicholas and Hayley with more of your answers.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and with me are Nicholas Zorpides and Hayley Andrews. Welcome back, guys. So, Nicholas, your second question. I've been looking at purchasing an apartment in central London which has a relatively short time left on its lease, i.e. 57 years. I understand that on the new leasehold properties there is now a minimum term of 999 years. Will these new regulations apply retrospectively and therefore allow me to extend the lease time on this property without huge cost? Cool,
Yeah,
I wonder what you're going to say on that one.
Yeah. Well, let's start by addressing that the reforms haven't occurred yet. It was something put forward by the Housing Secretary last year.
Okay.
So whereby the rights to extend up to 990 years and the removal of marriage value, which is probably the most significant in all of that, because I think Savills showed that anything upwards of 130 to 150 years is pretty much freehold value. So it doesn't necessarily assist, you know, the leaseholder in gaining more value in their property anyway. So the Reform Act of 93 already gives leaseholders the right to extend to over 90 years. So they already have that right at the moment. It's a bit of window dressing, if I'm honest, and it hasn't been put in place. So to wait, there's no telling as to how long it will take. And I have seen some kind of high-end lawyers contesting the removal of the marriage value because that has a significant impact on the freeholder. He takes up to 50% of the synergistic value of the property.
Sorry to interrupt you.
So-
Do you want to give our viewers a 2-sentence benefit of the meaning of the expression marriage value?
Yeah, I could do. So marriage value is essentially
2 sentences.
No, it's difficult to say in 2. It's the apportionment of value to the freeholder after it drops below 80 years.
Okay.
So the lower it drops, so in this instance 57 years, the landlord will have a higher share of the value, which his apportionment is up to 50%. So anything above 80 years, that wouldn't come into effect. So as it stands, the biggest change in this is the removal of marriage value, which I think is the biggest game changer should that occur. Whether it does or not, I'm not sure yet, but it hasn't come into play. So whether to wait or not, the lower your lease gets, the more you're going to pay. So I would actually advise is to get it done as quickly as you can, rather than waiting.
So in terms of new build developments, are developers just anticipating this regulation and giving 999 years?
So what we've seen is they already are for new builds giving that and removing the ground rent as well.
Taking it down to a peppercorn.
Peppercorn rent. So that's already happening. Albeit once you do extend your lease, even as it stands now, then it does reduce to a peppercorn anyway.
Okay. I mean, I think it's quite interesting where you get people coming into London who don't fully understand leasehold and freehold. They sort of think that sort of leasehold is some kind of dastardly trick that people in London sort of pull on you when you're buying a property. But actually, they shouldn't forget the real need for that. It was a way originally of just controlling the aesthetics of the building, the management of the building, and it's actually done properly. It works very, very well.
Yeah,
you know, if you've got a good landlord, if you've got a good managing agent, then it does work well. But like in most things in life, there are rogues and villains, aren't there?
I mean, I have seen, especially in older leases, where every 10, 20, 30 years the ground rent doubles.
Yeah.
And I've seen recently, I've done a lease extension for a client whereby it doubled to, by the end of it, it was £4,000 a year. And he actually had an issue in obtaining a mortgage to acquire the property. So we had to extend the lease in order for him to reduce that down to a peppercorn. So it does have an effect, but the majority of older leases, usually you'll be expected £50, £100, £250, and it kind of doubles every 20 odd years.
Nick, I know when service charge was a subject a couple of years ago, there's a lot of people complaining about a higher level of service charges. And one or two lenders were starting to say once the service charge goes above 1% of the value of the property, they've been somewhat reticent to fund that property. Yeah. Are you finding that still?
I would say that service charge is a bigger issue than your ground rents and lease extensions,
I agree
because that could be significant.
Yeah.
You know, and that's an annual fee that you're paying. You know,
and are you finding many lenders do look at the service charge before they'll agree to lend?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, because it can be quite hefty, and especially now what's going on with the fire regs and everything else, and the removal of cladding, you can imagine it can be significant.
Well, I can only see that getting worse, especially if the government are determined to make the developer responsible, come what may, for the alterations to the building. I mean, I don't know where my sympathy lies really, because, you know, a developer will have built a building. We all know building regs are fairly strict certainly in most town centres anyway. So they've complied with building regs, they've got their planning, they've done everything by the book, and then all of a sudden the government's saying, well, hey, it's your fault. You know, you've got to pay. Conversely, is it right that the tenant who's paid their money in good faith and bought,
exactly, yeah.
You know, I don't know. I don't know where the responsibility lies. Do you?
No, I think it's not great on both sides, is it really?
No.
I mean, with the leasehold reform, I do think that will be great news to anyone that is a leaseholder. And of course, I do think it will open up lending capability as well, because of course, short leases and things like that, you're restricted. And then of course, escalating ground rents and that is going to all be controlled. So from a leaseholder's point of view, it's fantastic news, really.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
from a freeholder,
it's
not so great.
Not so good. I think Savills carried out some research, and they actually found that if this reform does come into play, it'll be more expensive to extend the lease. Not by much, but it will be slightly more expensive to extend the lease.
Well, you see,
it's meant to be fairer and easier and cheaper.
But that's regulated, isn't it? I mean, and I'm no leaseholder specialist, but and I have a leasehold specialist that I refer to if I have a leasehold issue, like absent freeholder recently, one I've just purchased, which has been a bloody nightmare. Pardon my French, but
it is meant to be easier and cheaper for leaseholders.
That's the point. Yes, so it's kind of capped, isn't it?
Somewhat.
There's a formula that you
you
follow.
see,
of course, there is a
up until
formula.
recently, with all this talk of reform, you could probably get 25, even 30 times the ground rent, couldn't you, for a freehold investment? And that was very nice. I mean, the investment might have been a little bit like watching paint dry, but nevertheless, it was safe. It was guaranteed, because nobody wants to lose their property because they don't pay the ground rent, so it was secure. But of course, all that's out of the window now. So now my fear is that
they've all been sold in auction.
Well, yeah, but my fear is that freeholders start to say, well, you know, let's have a look at the service charge and see how we can manipulate that to
to
enhance the
more,
value of our freehold, to because that's a very difficult argument in itself, isn't it? If a freeholder wants to instigate something on the service charge that he can show actually enhances the value of the building, you've got a pretty tough struggle to stop him doing it.
Yeah, at the moment I'm finding a lot of individuals are proceeding with leasehold enfranchisement, so they've taken over the freehold of the property, and they manage it themselves.
Nicholas, that's okay, but I mean, if you take where I live, I mean, I think there's about 650, 700 flats. I would say 50-60% of them are owned abroad, and you try and get your over 50% with that. With that
I think that works well on your smaller kind of
blocks,
like 4, 6, maybe.
I have been involved in some bigger ones, but it's a lot more difficult.
Would that be classed as a share of freehold?
So essentially, yes, you'll have an apportionment of, and then you'll appoint you'll set up a company, and one person will be the director who manages the property management side of it. So,
okay, well, there we are. That was a great answer for you. Take it all in. So there we are. Hayley, your second question. If I buy a property with a view to turning it into either an HMO or a buy-to-let investment, given the fact that I rent now and don't own my main home, would the purchase of an investment property attract the 3% premium stamp duty tax as a second property?
So if you're buying in your own personal name and you don't own a property, you wouldn't attract the 3% surcharge, but you would lose your first-time buyer's relief. If you were to buy through a limited company, you would attract the 3% surcharge, but you would protect your own personal first-time buyer's relief. So it's what's best for you, really.
What you're trying to say is you're stuffed either way.
Well, you're going to pay it one way or another. So of course it depends on your structure and what you're looking to achieve. Are you looking to be a homeowner in the future? Because of course that will have an impact on the stamp duty that you personally have to pay. So. And of course, if you're buying, commercial, again, it's completely different and it doesn't apply. So it's really, what are you buying? What's your intention? And what's going to be the best route for you, really? So it's been a long time since I've purchased. Well, I don't. It's never applied. Every single property I've purchased from a residential point of view always fetches a 3% surcharge. Because I've been buying for a long time.
I think the moral here is a little bit like that business ethic, isn't it? That if somebody doesn't turn you over on the first deal, it's only because they're going to get you on the second one.
It's kind of a pinch before a bite.
Yeah, I think that's the government's.
I think just work out. Majority of the people that are purchasing investment properties, their own home will be more valuable. So the tax saving that they may have from there will probably be better for them. But again, it comes down to, what do you want?
Hayley, you deal with a lot of people that are starting off in business. Do you, to me, it's quite a new innovation where people rent their own home but buy to invest. I mean, that's quite a new phenomenon, really, isn't it?
Well, it's more common recently, I would say. The downside to that is, of course, your lending capability. The lender wants to see that you're a homeowner. And especially when you're just starting out, if you're investing through a brand new limited company, it holds no assets. You don't have, kind of a credit profile or a footprint, especially if you're international as well. If you don't own your own home, you're limited to the lenders that will actually,
well, you're going to end up having to give a sort of supported personal guarantee, aren't you, or something?
And they want you to be a homeowner if you're given a personal guarantee. So a lot of them now are taking out personal guarantees and debentures over the company. But yeah, so your liability isn't limited, but from a tax point of view, it depending on what you're looking to achieve, it's pretty much most of the time the most tax efficient way to go down. But and of course, if you're international, you're paying an extra 2% on top of the 3% surcharge as well.
Yes.
So
it's terribly expensive, doesn't it?
It's terribly expensive.
How on earth we'll make a living, I just don't know. Anyway, look, thank you both very much for coming in. Hayley Andrews, thank you for coming down all the way from Birmingham to see us. And Nicholas Zorpides, thank you very much for coming in for your second show. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. My name's Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.